Well, I promised I wouldn't talk about Captain Marvel until it was released, and so now that the film is out in cinemas, I'm going to chime in and discuss how it's being received and the inevitable defense that mainstream critics are going to give it. Unless you've been living under a rock recently, you'll be aware that this film has been mired in controversy due to statements made by its lead actress, Brie Larson, and because of the film's feminist themes. I'm not going to go over all of that again. Suffice to say, audience reviews can now be found across the web, and generally speaking, they're exactly what I anticipated. I haven't actually seen the film myself, but there's lots of YouTubers and independent reviewers whose opinions I trust, and by and large, they're all saying roughly similar things. Chris Stuckman said that the film has no visual style, that it's a bland-looking movie. He said that there were no memorable fights. He believes it feels more like a Phase 1 Marvel film. He said the storytelling was messy, the tone and message isn't clear. Chris feels that Brie Larson didn't do a good job in the movie. He gave the film a C grade. Jeremy Jahns praised Ben Mendelsohn as the villain and Sam Jackson as Nick Fury. He also appreciated the winks and nods to 90s nostalgia, but the movie fell flat for him as he was expecting more to connect with, and whether it was Carol Danvers' fish-out-of-water narrative thread, or her amnesia story, or the buddy cop moments with Nick Fury, he thought that all of these things had been done better in other films. Jeremy thought Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman was more charismatic than Brie Larson as Captain Marvel. He concluded by saying that Captain Marvel is the Star Trek insurrection of the MCU. Not terrible, not great, has a good villain, but didn't flow well. Young Rippa59 said that fans of the MCU will believe that this is the most criminal and disrespectful entry into the franchise. He described Brie Larson as mundane and average at best. He also lamented the forced feminist messaging of the film. Just as a quick aside, I recall seeing one trailer where Carol is having these flashbacks, where men are telling her she's basically not good enough.
You won't last a week. They'll never let you fly.
This isn't a game for little girls.
Give it up!
You won't last a week. They'll never let you fly. This isn't a game for little girls. Give it up. Who actually says this kind of stuff to young girls or women? This is such a feminist delusion. Are there awful men or terrible fathers who discourage their daughters at every turn? I'm sure there are. They probably do the same thing to their sons. But do they represent the majority of men and fathers? Absolutely not. They're an extreme minority. And I'm sure there are many bad mothers who also discourage their children at every turn. But again, they're a minority. This is just ridiculous writing. We live in a society with affirmative action, diversity hiring, female empowerment messaging in adverts and corporate messaging, and academic scholarships and quotas for women. Western society does not put women and girls down. It elevates them, often at the expense of similarly qualified men. I actually covered a story recently where in the UK, they're pushing for gender equity outcomes in trade apprenticeships, for God's sake. Women and girls are not being held back by the patriarchy. This is just cringe-level social justice stuff.
I'm kind of done with you telling me what I can't do.
I'm kind of done with you telling me what I can't do. We're supposed to believe this persecution complex victim mentality nonsense when women in our society are denied nothing. They actually have more opportunities than men at this point. What's so weird is that this film is aimed at female audiences as some kind of feminist empowerment message, but it's one that almost no woman in the Western world could relate to, because the idea that women are basically being systematically suppressed or denied opportunities is completely and objectively absurd. Can people be held back in their lives and careers by their circumstances, discouragement from family, environmental factors, financial disadvantage, personal limitations, or other problems? Of course. But these are not challenges that only women face. Men can face them also. Over on Midnight's Edge, Andre talked about the film's activist subtext and said that the film was a mixed bag. He said, though there were some good and bad aspects to the film, it was mostly just bland. Overall entertaining, but one of the weaker installments of the MCU, probably occupying the bottom 5 in the franchise, in his opinion. Gary Beegler on Nerdrotic says that people should save their money and go to see Alita Battle Angel instead. He and his co-host Comics Division also mentioned what I expected from the film. The feminist theme that as soon as society or men get out of the way and stop holding women back, that women can basically do anything. The true villain of the film is the patriarchy, after all. There's no heroic journey. There's nothing at stake and no personal struggle for the character. And I would add to that This is a classic feminist entitlement message. You're deserving of everything because you have a birthright to success, and the only reason you don't have it right now is because other people are keeping it from you, specifically men. In other words, nothing feels like it needs to be worked for or earned. As feminism is a left-wing ideology, it is anti-meritocratic after all, hence its reliance on equity outcomes in education and the workplace. Everything is seen through the Marxist lens of class warfare between the oppressor class and the oppressed class. Anyway, audiences are just sick of being told that they're sexist for not liking a film featuring a strong female character. This is obviously nonsense. There have been plenty of tough, ass-kicking female heroes in film and television down the years, many of whom I mentioned in one of my previous videos, and they have all been embraced by majority male audiences. The PR and marketing behind Captain Marvel would almost have you believe that this film was somehow groundbreaking in its depiction of a female heroine, but nothing could be further from the truth. No barrier was broken in this film. What I can't stand about this strong female character trope is that in truth, what we're told is a strong female character is what I call a masculine female character, a male character cast with a female actor. A classic example of this would be Jyn Erso from Rogue One. Now, Rogue One is actually a pretty good Star Wars film, but Jyn Erso is a lifeless, dead behind the eyes, emotionless, stoic, and boring character who could easily have been cast with a male actor and nothing would have changed. In fact, the character probably would have made more sense if it had been cast with a male actor instead, because after all, she is beating up guys 3 times her size. I've got my issues with Joss Whedon's politics, but he was always able to write women very well. He could make them tough and self-reliant without compromising their femininity. And he could make them funny as well. This is why Black Widow truly came into her own when he began writing for her in the first Avengers film. Prior to that, in Iron Man 2, she was wooden and bereft of anything resembling real humanity. She was a cardboard cutout of a character. But from Avengers onward, she became three-dimensional. Her sense of humor developed, and her backstory began to unfold. She became relatable and likable. Whedon, of course, is an expert in writing solid female characters, given that he did create one of the most iconic of all. Buffy the Vampire Slayer was flawed, vulnerable, feminine, and highly relatable, but at the same time, she was unbelievably tough with superhuman strength. We don't see very many tough female characters like that these days. Female characters now have to be tough, perfect, and masculine in their thinking and behavior. This is the thing that female audiences should truly find offensive. These kinds of modern, perfect, Mary Sue, tough female characters are in no way empowering to young women, because it's as if the writers see actual feminine attributes as weak. I would argue that a strong female character, by definition, is a character that does not have her femininity compromised. The idea that a female character could be depicted as a mother, for example, is often seen as a negative stereotype by many feminists and left-wing critics. What a horrid, dehumanizing, and offensive thing to believe, given that the role of a mother is the most important job a human being can do. When it comes to Captain Marvel, audiences are just tired of being told that they're sexist, misogynistic trolls for not liking the film. We're all tired of being lectured to by an out-of-touch, elitist media who effectively look down upon the average audience member and hold their opinions in contempt. You can expect a series of articles from the mainstream press complaining about how sexist trolls are leaving negative reviews and what can be done about this. We already saw this when the media ran with the narrative that audiences were leaving negative reviews and review bombing Captain Marvel on Rotten Tomatoes before it came out. This isn't true, of course, as a film can't be reviewed until it comes out. People were simply indicating whether or not they were interested in seeing the film and leaving a comment explaining why. Because a lot of users didn't want to see it, citing the film's feminist messaging or Brie Larson's controversial comments on A Wrinkle in Time, or her desire to have less white men in the press tours, this was a huge problem for the woke mainstream critics. Apparently, we're not supposed to be able to publicly disagree with her on those things, I guess. You may notice that whether the topic is politics or entertainment in this case, there is a general disgust and intolerance from the ivory tower media elites at the idea that the general public, the rabble, are permitted to express their opinions at all. Dissenting voices are strongly discouraged nowadays. So now that Rotten Tomatoes has set a precedent by removing the want to see scores, one has to wonder if the audience review score itself will be removed next. If that happens, of course, the site will become obsolete not long after, as no one cares what biased critics have to say. This is why Gab to Center is so unbelievably awesome, as it permits the public to voice their opinion on any site, no matter what action is taken to try to limit their ability to do so. Regardless, it wouldn't be difficult to produce an audience-centric alternative review aggregator site. Recently, Gary of Nerdrotic made me aware of a podcast from Sci-Fi Wire from March 1st, episode 169 of a show called Who Won the Week. This was published a week before Captain Marvel came out. At the end of the podcast, Sci-Fi Wire's Adam Swiderski, Danny Roth, and Karama Horn begin discussing fan reaction to Captain Marvel and the whole situation with Rotten Tomatoes removing the want-to-see scores.
The bottom line on it is, or at least sort of where we are right now, is that Rotten Tomatoes sort of took an action. And made it so
they put a stop to it.
You can't. They just got rid of that score and said you can't weigh in on this movie until it's out.
Good.
And that was that.
And
I think they should get rid of the fan reviews entirely.
Okay, elaborate on that.
It's not a right.
But what gives you the right to review a film on Rotten Tomatoes and not someone else? Because a person is a professional film critic, this gives them a special privilege over most people? You're literally saying you want the public's ability to review a film to be removed, but professional film critics to have their ability maintained. So it's free speech for me and not for thee.
Wait, but
they run a website, they run a business, and critic reviews are critic reviews, and that's fine.
Okay.
But
yeah, so long as critics can leave their reviews, then that's just fine. Because I guess there should be nothing to burst that ideological echo chamber. I guess the public should just be told what to think and believe about films, because film critics know better than audiences as to what qualifies as a good film, right? I mean, what would audiences know anyway?
And listen, this is not to me saying fans can't have an opinion, but this is a tool that is obviously being abused more than it is being used constructively, especially around particular films that politically rub some people the wrong way for certain reasons. So
it's not being abused. The want-to-see ratings were being used as they were intended. The people were simply voicing opinions that you don't agree with. If they posted nothing but positive comments about the film, we wouldn't be talking about this.
It's why we can't have a nice thing. This thing would be nice if people used it the way it's supposed to be used, but no one is, so screw it.
Ah yes, calls for censorship of an online platform used by the public under the grounds that people can't behave themselves. But mainstream critics, they can behave themselves, of course. I guess you pro-critics are just more civilized than the rest of us, right? The reason audience scores matter is that they aren't beholden to any corporate interests. If all we had was mainstream critic scores, well, there may be a concern that the publication that the critic works for could introduce a kind of bias into their reviews. Audience scores are more accurate and better indicators as to whether a film is good or not. Anyway, the next portion is truly telling.
Here's where we actually are in the industry. If you want to talk about, quote, access media, every single person that wants to have access to things early, that wants to get access to things so that traffic is drawn to their site, will on occasion. Everybody at this podcast, everybody in our industry occasionally has to play softball, occasionally has to, look the other way a little bit. Everybody has to do it.
And right there, you have just proven my point. Therefore, the reviews of people who look the other way so they can gain access to things early cannot be fully trusted. Listen to what you have just said. Everyone at this podcast, everyone in our industry occasionally has to play softball.
But there's more.
Wait, we're turning what? Like a movie
in
that's
the sense that,
or?
I hated a movie, but I won't say that I hated the movie. Or an actor behaved a sort of way and you don't want to, put it out there that happened.
Right, because you might not get the next review,
right.
next
So
gig.
to some degree, everybody in our industry that is a part of this quote-unquote access media.
I love how she was playing coy there. What?
Has to sort of decide which battles they want to pick. Right? Which are the ones where my voice is the one that has to get said, right? And I think that this is the source. This is a thing that people are aware of. I think that they blow it up to be larger than it really is, But okay, let's acknowledge what I believe to be a truth, which is that.
So there you have it. I mean, this is the reason why so many members of the public believe that professional mainstream film critic reviews are worthless. Because you're admitting that there are incentives for those who sometimes look the other way and don't give a full, honest review of a film. And yet it's the public who are being told how they shouldn't have the right to comment and review films because they're abusing the tools that allow them to do so. I'm genuinely lost for words at this point. Not that I'm surprised that this kind of stuff is happening, but because of how this guy admits to it in such a cavalier fashion and yet still doesn't understand why the public resents corporate media film critics so much. By the way, according to The Verge, recently YouTube altered their algorithm when searching for Brie Larson on their site. They prioritized so-called authoritative sources, i.e. making her a newsworthy search term. As the article states, instead of videos from individual creators, YouTube responds with videos from Entertainment Tonight, ABC, CBS, CNN, and other news outlets first. So now the search results on YouTube have been manipulated to bury criticism of Brie Larson's recent controversial comments that have negatively affected perception of the film. Mainstream critics and corporations are again being given priority over the general public. And apparently, this was done for the same reason that Rotten Tomatoes removed the want-to-see ratings and comments for the film, to help fight the trolls. This is the issue with censorship. It begins slowly with serious and controversial important topics like politics. Then eventually it spreads like a cancer to other topics and genres that should be much less important, like movies and TV shows. Censorship is addictive to authoritarians who wield it, and once they get their hands on the banhammer, everyone else's speech that they don't like starts to look like a nail. Anyway, by all accounts, Captain Marvel looks set for a very strong opening weekend at the box office, with huge estimates being made at the time of producing this video, March 9th. It took several films for wokeness to push audiences away from Star Wars. Captain Marvel being a bland film was never going to damage the MCU's reputation all that much. As a lead-in to arguably the most eagerly awaited cliffhanger resolution in the history of time, people will watch it as an appetizer. The film will make a lot of money, but it's unlikely Disney will be able to pull off this trick twice. Captain Marvel benefits from the strong MCU brand that was built up over the past 10 years, and of course, from the anticipation for Endgame. But any future MCU films after Endgame are obviously going to have to stand on their own merits, and audiences are only going to tolerate bland movies and feminist messaging for so long. Like I said before, things were going well for Disney with The Force Awakens. But flash forward 2 films later, and it's a very different story. If the next Captain Marvel film isn't a big improvement, it'll likely suffer the same fate as The Last Jedi and Solo. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.